Have you ever wondered why some of the most extraordinary stories never make it into the history books? Welcome to 7 Continents, One Story.
So glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, this is literally my favorite place to be. Let's go.
I'm Celine, based in Edinburgh, Scotland. History hobbyist, library regular, endlessly curious.
I'm Nils, professor of history from Sweden. I've spent decades collecting these stories.
And I'm Ethan from Malta. I'm the one who always asks what happened in Japan.
Each episode, we travel together through time, across all 7 continents, to uncover a story that shaped the world.
We bring the history. Celine brings the questions that make you think differently about it.
And I bring the questions that make Nils slightly nervous.
The more we learn, the more we realize how much there still is to discover.
I want to tell you about a man who left home for a diplomatic mission and did not return for 13 years. He left with 100 men. He returned with 2. His mission had failed, technically. The alliance he was sent to forge never happened. The people he was supposed to recruit had moved on to a different land and had no interest in the war. He needed them to fight. And yet, what he brought back changed the world more profoundly than any successful diplomatic mission in history.
His name was Zhang Qian. He was a Han Dynasty palace attendant. He volunteered for a mission that almost everyone considered suicidal, and the route he opened, the network of trade paths that would later be named the Silk Road, connected east and west for the next 1,500 years.
The Silk Road, I feel like everyone knows the name, but no one can quite explain what it was.
That is the first thing we need to fix, because what the Silk Road actually was, how it worked, who made it work, what traveled along it besides silk, is far more surprising than the name suggests. Welcome to 7 Continents, One Story. I am Nils, your host and professor of history.
I am Celine, library worker from Edinburgh, and this is one of those stories where the human cost behind the great historical narrative took me by surprise.
I am Ethan from Malta, and Malta is on the Silk Road. That fact alone is enough to get me here.
Before we go any further, I want to give you an object to hold in your mind. Somewhere in Central Asia, around the year 1000 of the Common Era, someone sealed a room, a small chamber carved into a cliff face in the Gansu corridor of China, at a place called Dunhuang. Inside this chamber, tens of thousands of manuscripts, scrolls, printed pages, documents in at least 17 different languages. The chamber was sealed, the entrance hidden behind a plaster wall. For 900 years, no one opened it.
Why would someone seal thousands of manuscripts?
We do not know for certain. The most likely explanation, they were preserving them from invasion. But the people who sealed the room never came back to retrieve what they had hidden. Clue 1, our artifact was inside that sealed chamber. It is made of paper. It is printed, not handwritten. And it is the oldest dated printed document in the world.
Oldest dated printed document, so this predates Gutenberg. By how long?
By almost 600 years. That is our first clue. Think about what would be in a sealed library at Dunhuang, a key waypoint on the Silk Road in the year 1000. What kind of text would be the most precious thing to preserve? To understand why the Silk Road began, you need to understand one thing about the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Emperor Han Wudi, one of the most powerful rulers China had ever seen, had a problem. His name means martial emperor, and he took that name seriously. But the enemies he faced were unlike anything Chinese military tradition had prepared for.
The Xiongnu.
The Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic peoples on the northern steppe. Skilled horsemen, extraordinary warriors, impossible to pin down for a conventional battle. For generations, the Han had managed the Xiongnu threat through tribute payments and diplomacy. Wudi decided this was humiliating, and he was going to end it.
And he needed allies to do that.
He needed allies further west, a people called the Yuezhi, who had previously been driven westward by the Xiongnu themselves. The logic was, the Yuezhi hate the Xiongnu who displaced them. We hate the Xiongnu who raid us. Together, we can crush them from both sides.
And so Zhang Qian was sent west to find the Yuezhi and propose this alliance.
In 138 BCE, with 100 men, into the territory no Han diplomat had ever entered. Through lands controlled by the Xiongnu themselves.
He had to cross Xiongnu territory to reach the people who the Xiongnu had driven away.
He did, and within weeks of setting out, he was captured. Zhang Qian was held by the Xiongnu for approximately 10 years. He was not treated cruelly. He was given a Xiongnu wife, and he fathered children. But he was a prisoner. He held the emperor's diplomatic credentials the entire time. He never formally surrendered his mission.
10 years. The political situation in China had changed. The political situation in the West had changed. The Yuezhi had moved further west. His mission was essentially obsolete.
And yet, the moment an opportunity came, a period of reduced supervision, Zhang Qian escaped. With his Xiongnu wife and one companion named Ganfu, he went west, across the Taklamakan Desert, through the kingdoms of Fergana, which the Chinese called Daoist, further west into Sogdia, further still to Bactria, in what is now Afghanistan.
He finally found the Yuezhi.
He found them, living comfortably in Bactria, having conquered it and settled there. And they had absolutely no interest in fighting the Xiongnu. They had moved on, literally and figuratively. They were prosperous. The war he wanted them to join was not their problem. Zhang Qian spent a year trying to convince them. He failed completely. And then he began the long journey home. He was captured again, held for another year. And when the Xiongnu Confederation fractured into civil war, he escaped a second time and finally reached Chang'an.
13 years after he left, with 2 survivors from the original 100.
Technically, a failure. His mission objective, the military alliance against the Xiongnu, was never achieved. But what he brought back was something far more valuable. The first detailed Chinese knowledge of the Western world, the kingdoms that existed, the trade goods available, the horses.
The horses?
The Fergana horses. Zhang Qian had seen the horses of the Daoist kingdom and was stunned. Larger than any horse the Han had seen. Heavenly horses. Horses that seemed to sweat blood. Emperor Wudi wanted these horses so badly that he eventually launched military campaigns just to obtain them. Your second clue. In 1900, a Daoist monk named Wang Yuanlu was cleaning one of the cave temples at Dunhuang when he noticed something behind a sealed wall. He broke through and found the chamber I described, tens of thousands of manuscripts, sealed for 9 centuries. A few years later, a British archaeologist named Aurel Stein arrived at Dunhuang. He negotiated with Wang Yuanlu and acquired a significant portion of the manuscripts for roughly 220 British pounds.
220 pounds for the oldest printed document in the world?
It was a different time. The manuscripts are now in the British Library in London. Our ARTEFACT is among them. Clue 2. It is not a political document. It is not a trade record. It is a religious text, specifically a Buddhist text, and its presence in a sealed cave at Dunhuang, a way station on the Silk Road, tells you everything about what the Silk Road actually moved, beyond silk.
So the Silk Road moved religion.
The Silk Road moved everything. Ideas, religions, art, technology, disease. Silk was just the commodity that a 19th century German geographer used when he needed to name the thing. The man who gave it that name, Ferdinand von Richthofen, in 1877, had never traveled it himself. Let me correct the most persistent misconception. The Silk Road was not a road. It was not even a single route. It was a network, a shifting, branching, overlapping series of paths across Central Asia, connecting China to the Mediterranean world through multiple possible routes.
How far did it stretch?
In its fullest expression, from Chang'an, modern Xi'an, in the east, through the Gansu corridor, through the Taklamakan Desert, through the kingdoms of Central Asia, through Persia, through Mesopotamia, to the ports of the Levant, and from there by sea to Rome, over 7,000 kilometers of overland travel.
And no single merchant traveled the whole thing?
Almost never. The Silk Road worked through relay trade. Goods passed from hand to hand across each segment. A Chinese merchant sold silk to a Sogdian merchant in Dunhuang. The Sogdian carried it to Samarkand. Another merchant took it west to Merv. another to Ctesiphon. The silk that arrived in Rome had passed through many hands.
And the price multiplied each time.
By the time Chinese silk reached Rome, it was worth more than its weight in gold. Roman senators complained about the economic drain of paying for it. Pliny the Elder estimated that Rome was losing 100 million sesterces per year to the luxury trade with the East.
And beyond silk, what else moved?
In one direction, silk, porcelain, tea, paper, and eventually the knowledge of how to make paper. Gunpowder, though that came much later. Printing technology. In the other direction, glass. Rome was producing glass of a quality that China could not match, and Roman glassware has been found in Han tombs as far east as Guangzhou. Gold, silver. Horses, always horses. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cotton from India, spices from Southeast Asia.
And the ideas?
Buddhism traveled east from India through the Silk Road network. Zhang Qian's journeys had opened the routes through which Buddhist missionaries and texts would eventually reach China and transform its civilization. Christianity and Islam moved along the same routes. The Nestorian Church had congregations in China by the 7th century. Zoroastrianism spread. Manichaeism spread. Every major religious tradition of the ancient world traveled these routes.
And disease.
And disease. The Antonine Plague that devastated the Roman Empire in the 2nd century, possibly smallpox, likely arrived via trade routes. The Black Death of the 14th century traveled along the Silk Road from Central Asia to Europe. When you open the world to trade, you open it to everything. Before we continue, a word from our partner, Cyprus Real Returns. You know, studying the Silk Road makes you think about strategic positioning. Who controls the nodes? Who benefits from the connections? Who builds lasting value along established routes? It is the same instinct behind why I am glad to partner with Cyprus Real Returns. They offer guaranteed returns of 6 to 12% on Cyprus real estate, secured through the Cyprus Land Registry, with professional management handling everything. Cyprus sits at a real modern crossroads, and property values there are growing nearly 8% annually. Visit CYPRUSREALRETURNS.com to explore what that means for your own financial journey. The Silk Road reached its peak during the Tang Dynasty in China, the 7th to 10th centuries. Chang'an, the Tang capital, was the most cosmopolitan city on Earth, with populations from across Central Asia, Persia, Arabia, India, and Japan. The Tang Emperor Xuanzong reportedly had musicians from a dozen different cultural traditions performing at court simultaneously.
A genuine multicultural metropolis.
The second peak came under the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries. Genghis Khan and his successors, whatever else they destroyed, created political unity across the entire landmass from China to Eastern Europe. For the first time, a merchant could theoretically travel the entire route under one political umbrella. Marco Polo made his journey in this window.
And then it ended.
It shifted. Several forces combined to redirect trade. The Black Death, traveling along the Silk Road, devastated the populations that kept it running. The fall of the Mongol Empire fragmented political control again. The Ottoman Empire's control of the western end raised costs. And then, most decisively, the Portuguese navigators found the sea route around Africa to India and Asia. Suddenly, goods could travel by ship in bulk more cheaply without the overland relays and their markups.
The sea routes didn't kill the Silk Road, they made it redundant.
By the mid-15th century, the overland trade had declined dramatically. Though it never entirely stopped, it simply became less central to the global economy.
Here is your dilemma.
It is 128 BCE. You are Zhang Qian. You have just escaped from your second Xiongnu captivity, 13 years after you left Chang'an. You are somewhere in Central Asia. You survived. Your mission technically failed. The UAG would not help, and the strategic landscape has shifted entirely since Emperor Wu Di sent you. You have two choices.
You can take the fastest, safest route back to Chang'an, south through Tibet, avoiding Xiongnu territory, and report your failure, or you can detour. Take time to explore more of the Western kingdoms you passed through, document their goods, their people, their military strength. Arrive later, but with an intelligence report so comprehensive that it becomes the foundation of a new Chinese foreign policy. The detour risks another capture, another decade lost. The emperor may not even be on the throne when you return.
I am going home. 13 years is enough.
That is entirely reasonable.
I have been away 13 years. I have a wife, I have children technically, back in Xiongnu territory. I have survived the impossible. I go home.
And Zhang Qian?
Zhang Qian gathered intelligence on everything he could, spent time in Bactria and in the surrounding kingdoms, and returned with one of the most comprehensive reports on the Western world that any Chinese court had ever received. Whether he detoured consciously or whether the extra time was forced upon him by his second capture, we cannot be certain. What we know is that his report convinced Emperor Wudi to send a second mission in 119 BCE, and that second mission established the trade relationships that eventually became the Silk Road.
One man's imprisonment became the world's most consequential trade route.
The Diamond Sutra, printed in the year 868 of the Common Era during the Tang Dynasty. The printer's colophon at the end reads, "Reverently made for universal free distribution by Wang Yuanlu on behalf of his two parents on the 15th of the 4th moon of the 9th year of Xiantong," the oldest dated printed document in the world. Made not for profit, not for propaganda, but as an act of religious devotion. It is a Buddhist text, the Vajrakadika Prajnaparamita Sutra, one of the core texts of Mahayana Buddhism. Buddhism had traveled from India to China along the routes that Zhang Qian had first opened. The text was printed in China using block printing, a Chinese invention, and deposited in a cave library at Dunhuang, the gateway to the Silk Road.
And sealed in a cave for 900 years.
And sealed and rediscovered by a monk and purchased by an archaeologist for £200 and carried to the British Library in London, where it remains to this day.
A Buddhist text, printed in China, traveling from India, stored in a gateway city on a trade route that connected Rome to Xi'an, sealed in a cave for 9 centuries.
This is what the Silk Road actually moved. Not silk, not gold, a prayer, a text of spiritual wisdom, copied and printed and distributed and preserved because someone thought the ideas inside were worth protecting across centuries.
I want to name a group of people who almost never appear in the standard telling of this story.
The Sogdians, an Iranian-speaking people from the region of Sogdia, roughly modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, centered on the great city of Samarkand. For at least 600 years, from roughly the 3rd century to the 10th century of the Common Era, the Sogdians were the commercial backbone of the Silk Road. They were not the emperors, they were not the conquerors, they were the merchants who actually did the work.
What makes them unsung?
They left relatively few records in the languages that historians trained to read. Most of their documentation was in Sogdian, an Iranian dialect that was for centuries a lingua franca of the entire Central Asian trade network, but which almost no one studies today. In 1907, the same year Aurel Stein discovered the Dunhuang manuscripts. He also found a bundle of letters in a ruined watchtower near Dunhuang. These are the Sogdian ancient letters, merchant correspondence from approximately 313 of the Common Era, private letters, business letters, a woman writing to complain that her husband had abandoned her in Dunhuang, a merchant reporting on political instability in China, one of the earliest non-Chinese sources to mention the collapse of the Western Jin dynasty.
So we have their actual correspondence?
We have their voices. And from those letters and from other sources we know the Sogdians built commercial networks that spanned from China to the Byzantine Empire. They had trading colonies, Sogdian communities, in cities all along the route. They learned the local languages. They navigated local politics. They kept the goods moving when empires rose and fell around them.
The Silk Road existed because Zhang Qian opened the routes, but it functioned because the Sogdians worked it.
The Sogdians, a people whose language shaped half of Central Asia, whose merchants connected two of the greatest civilizations in human history, and whose name most people have never heard. Remember them.
138 BCE. A palace attendant volunteers for a mission everyone considers suicidal. He disappears into the West for 13 years. He returns with 2 men and a map of the world that China did not previously possess.
And from that map, from those intelligence reports, from those trade relationships, a network grows. 7,000 kilometers, 15 centuries. Every religion that defines the modern world traveling its routes. Every technology that transformed civilization passing hand to hand along its roads.
All because one man refused to abandon his diplomatic credentials during 10 years of captivity.
The Silk Road was not one thing. It was silk and glass and horses and spices and paper and gunpowder and Buddhism and Islam and Christianity and the Black Death and the Diamond Sutra and the Sogdian letters and the Fergana horses and the Tang cosmopolitans and Marco Polo and everything else that the human impulse to connect produced across 15 centuries.
And it began with one man, one mission, one extraordinary, stubborn, dangerous decision to keep going west.
Until our next journey through time, keep history alive.
One final thought before you go. The Silk Road showed that the most enduring value comes not from controlling a single commodity, but from positioning yourself at the intersection of multiple routes and relationships. Smart investors understand the same principle. Cyprus Real Returns offers exactly that kind of strategic positioning. Guaranteed returns of 6 to 12% on Cyprus real estate, 100% secured through the Cyprus Land Registry, professionally managed. Cyprus is at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia, much like the great Silk Road waypoints that created lasting wealth. Visit CYPRUSREALRETURNS.com and position yourself well.